Within weeks of the US-led invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein was toppled from power, and then US President George Bush declared victory.
In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
But this claim proved false, along with the expectation of big oil revenues. Back in March 2003, then US Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz said the money from oil would cover the cost of the war.
The oil revenue of that country could bring between $50 billion and $100 billion over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. We're dealing with a country that could really finance its own reconstruction, and relatively soon.
As the fighting dragged on, the cost mushroomed. The US alone faces a price tag of $800 billion, roughly 16 times higher than initially predicted by the Bush administration. Much of this money went to private contractors. The lack of oversight allowed them to siphon off as much as $12 million a day through corruption and fraud. And while Iraq's oil production is rising, the money it brings in is being used to pay for 99% of the country's running costs, like government salaries. The country boasts the world's second highest oil reserves after Saudi Arabia, so it could increase its output. But that requires a big investment in infrastructure, beyond the $88 billion that the government is seeking from international investors and donors. So far, it's received pledges for only $30 billion to be delivered over the next decade, making the expectations of an oil boom appear little more than a pipe dream. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Joining me now is Dr. Mamdouh Salameh. He's an international oil economist and a visiting professor of energy economics at the ESCP Europe Business School in London. Dr. Salameh, great to have you on Money Talks. Let me just take you through the maths, the way I see it. Iraq generates about 4 million barrels of oil a day. At about $65 a barrel, that works out to about $260 million a day, or about $95 billion over a year. That should be enough and more to rebuild Iraq. Where is all that money going?
A large amount of that money went to finance the battle against IS, which Iraq won very successfully. But Iraq also owes the major oil companies helping it to develop many oil fields and raise its production. He owes them, or Iraq owes them, a lot of money, because when the contracts were given in 2009, it was based on $2 per every barrel produced. This means that the price since 2014 went down to around 26, but Iraq still had to pay $2 a barrel of production. This means that Iraq was losing. So it built a lot of debts with these companies, unpaid amounts of money, and it needed to negotiate a downgrading of that figure to reflect the volatility of the oil price. So when the oil price is up, Iraq is prepared to pay $2. But when the oil price declines, Iraq should be flexible enough to reduce the payment. So all this amount of money is outstanding. And although Iraq is the second biggest producer of oil in OPEC and a major exporter, as you mentioned at the start of the interview, exporting almost 4 million barrels a day, it still needs more money to invest in more than 50 major discovered oil fields, but not developed. Right. That will cost billions of dollars before Iraq can bring them on stream.
Right. Dr. Salameh, I want to come back to the issue of OPEC in a second, but how big a factor is corruption in all of this? How much is being lost through corruption?
Well, I hear about that, as you heard yourself. Corruption is not limited to Iraq. Corruption is everywhere in the world, from the United States to Russia to Saudi Arabia to Jordan to any country, because there is no business which can go ahead without a bit of greasing the hand. And consequently, corruption, unfortunately, has become a fact of life in the global economy and the openness of the global economy. So Iraq is one of the countries which have been afflicted with corruption, but it is not the only country in the world.
Dr. Salameh, one final question. We are running out of time. Let's talk about OPEC. Is OPEC a help or a hindrance to Iraq?
OPEC will eventually help Iraq because Iraq has a production quota, an old one, which is around 3 million barrels a day. With growing Iraqi production, Iraq will soon be producing up to 6 or 7 million barrels by 2020, 2021. Consequently, Iraq is going to demand a higher production quota from OPEC, possibly 5 million barrels in the next few months.
All right, we are going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Dr. Mamdouh Salameh, energy economist from London, thank you very much indeed.